most important aspects of any movie sequel is staying true to the returning characters, to ensure that they're presented in a way that's consistent with their prior portrayal and makes total sense moving forward. It's of course expected that characters will evolve throughout a series, but fans don't take too kindly when their beloved heroes become dumber or start acting out of character in later installments. It's almost never ever satisfying to watch. While so many sequels see returning characters get quickly killed off in a deeply stupid way that proves wildly unsatisfying, these heroes, whether they actually made it to the end or not, all prove they've learned something from their initial fateful encounter. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with 10 horror movie heroes who became smarter in the sequel. Number 10. Laurie Strode, Halloween 2018. As iconic as Halloween's Laurie Strode is in John Carpenter's original 1978 movie, she nevertheless makes some pretty severe mistakes while battling Michael Myers. Namely, she drops Michael's knife twice in the movie's climax and is ultimately only spared thanks to a last-second assist from a gun-toting Dr. Loomis. Now, ignoring the many decanonized Halloween sequels, when we catch up with Laurie once again in 2018's follow-up, Laurie is decidedly more prepared to fend off Michael. Though unquestionably racked with PTSD, Laurie has spent 40 years readying herself for the inevitability of Michael breaking out of Smith's Grove Psychiatric Hospital. She's trained herself to handle firearms, is decidedly more adept at close quarters combat, and has built a fortified fortress of a house complete with gated doorways and a panic room basement. Her ultimate plan to trap and burn Michael to death inside her house is far smarter than anything the wildly unprepared Laurie could understandably come up with in the original film, that's for sure. It's just a shame the fire department rushed to the blaze at the start of Halloween Kills and liberated him before he could burn to cinders. Number 9. Sidney Prescott, Scream 3-6. Scream's Sidney Prescott is certainly one of the smartest protagonists of any major horror franchise, and is actually shown to become ever smarter over the course of the series. If you can excuse some of the iffier decision-making in Scream 2, namely going back to unmasked Ghostface following the car crash, Sid constantly learns from her prior near-death experiences. For instance, in Scream 3, Sidney decides that being stalked by 2 pairs of deranged murderers is enough for one lifetime, and moves to an undisclosed location in remote California, where only her closest associates have her phone number. Sure, she lives as a recluse, but she has a peaceful life while doing meaningful work as a crisis counsellor for women. By the time Scream 4 rolls around, Sidney feels decidedly better equipped to take down her cousin Jill in the climax, refusing to be caught off guard by one last scare, and reflexively shooting her dead when she attempts a last stand. In the 5th movie, Sidney has entirely moved on from Woodsboro and started a family, yet is still shown to harbour exemplary survival skills, even hanging up on Ghostface mid-call this time around. But it's in Scream 6 where Sid demonstrates her greatest smarts of all, straight up refusing to help with the Ghostface situation in New York City, even if this was ultimately dictated by a salary dispute between Neve Campbell and Paramount. While it's likely that Sidney will eventually return in a future Scream film, at present, she's living her best life and not allowing herself to be dragged back into the fray out of a misguided sense of obligation. Number 8. Ellen Ripley, Aliens. Much like Sidney, Aliens' Ellen Ripley is often held up as one of the smartest protagonists in the horror genre. In the original Alien, Ripley sensibly errs on the side of caution after Kane is attacked by a facehugger, refusing to grant the crew entry back into the Nostromo due to quarantine regulations. That is until she's overruled by Ash, of course. She makes basically all the right decisions that are within her power, and when she's finally pulled out of stasis 57 years later in Aliens, she quickly proves that she's lost none of her smarts. Even accepting that Ripley agrees to accompany the Colonial Marines to the Hadley's Hope colony at all, she's a decidedly more forceful and forthright character in the sequel. In the face of the other solutions suggested for dealing with the xenomorph infestation, Ripley puts her prior knowledge of the creatures to good use by suggesting nothing short of levelling the entire area. And it's absolutely the right call, albeit one that's derailed when the dropship's pilot is killed by one of the aliens. Boo! All the same, Ripley herself doesn't put a single foot wrong, showing even greater combat awareness and self-preservation expertise than she did the first time around. Number 7. Clear Rivers, Final Destination 2. In the first Final Destination, the central characters were very clearly and understandably in over their heads, given that nobody expects literal death itself to start coming back for them following a near-death experience, right? One of the original movie's co-protagonists was Clear Rivers, who, with the help of Alex Browning, was able to escape death's grasp even as her doubts lingered about being truly free. Final Destination 2 reveals that Alex was killed by a falling brick between films, prompting a traumatized Clear to do the smartest thing that anyone's ever done in any of these films: lock herself away from death. When we catch up with Clear in the second film, she's had herself incarcerated in a psychiatric hospital, where inside an empty padded room it's nigh on impossible for death to cause her demise. Granted, this isn't much of a life at all, but Clear at least came up with a clever solution to keep death at bay, something nobody else in this series ever really figured out. However, death finally won out in the end, with Clear being persuaded to leave the hospital and help the new band of survivors, leading to her explosive demise at the end of the movie. Oopsie. Number 6. Arkin O'Brien, The Collection. In The Collector, Arkin O'Brien got far more than he bargained for when he robbed a house in order to pay a debt, only to discover that the titular serial killer had already broken in. But even in the first film, Arkin is a relatively capable character who nevertheless makes a few silly mistakes. Namely, not fleeing the scene when he first had the chance, and then running clear into the path of a cop car while making his escape, allowing the Collector to capture him at the end of the movie. But Arkin is also an underappreciated example of an anti-hero who took everything they learned the first time around and applied it in spades for the sequel. In The Collection, Arkin escapes early on and is convinced to help another party take down the Collector in exchange for his criminal record being purged, which might not sound too smart, but Arkin is far greater prepared to deal with his arch-nemesis this time around. At the end of the movie, now armed with the knowledge that the Collector is an entomologist, he researches every working entomologist within a 200-kilometer radius and eventually tracks the killer down to his home. Here, Arkin subdues and kidnaps the unmasked Collector, promising to torture and kill him just as he did so many others. Through his resourcefulness and observation skills, he was able to learn from his mistakes and come out on top. Number 5. Agent Strahm, Saw 5. FBI agent Peter Strahm is introduced in Saw 4, and it doesn't take long to deduce that the guy is in way over his head. Though he's the first to suggest the ultimately correct possibility of Jigsaw having a secret apprentice, he plays directly into Jigsaw's hands at the end of the movie. Yet, Saw 5 sees Strahm get a serious intelligence upgrade, as he devises probably the most impressive escape plan from any trap in the entire Saw series. At the start of the 5th movie, Strahm is attacked and wakes up with a glass box placed over his head, which quickly fills up with water, primed to drown him unless he can figure out a way to breathe. At that moment, Strahm goes full MacGyver, grabbing a pen from his pocket and stabbing himself in the throat, performing a makeshift tracheotomy which allows him to breathe despite the box filling up. It's all the more impressive given that the trap was clearly designed to be unwinnable, yet Strahm's quick thinking allowed him to survive. It's just a shame that he didn't listen to Hoffman's advice at the end of the movie and got crushed to death in his final test. Number 4. Ash Williams, Army of Darkness. In the first 2 Evil Dead movies, Ash Williams is basically an everyman character thrust into an impossible situation and, all things considered, puts up a damn good fight against the Deadites. You probably wouldn't call him exceptionally smart, but he's a capable survivor under the circumstances. But by the time the 3rd film rolls around, Ash has undergone something of a personality transplant, transformed into a more cynical wisecracker, as even filmmaker Sam Raimi himself admits is inconsistent with his established character. Yet despite his inherent goofiness, Ash also becomes much smarter in Army of Darkness, putting his engineering degree to good use by using a Chemistry 101 textbook to create gunpowder, building a metal hand, and even converting his car into a steam-powered death coaster. Ash obviously doesn't do all this by himself, but his sheer ingenuity throughout the movie nevertheless shows a frankly ridiculous amount of critical thinking compared to the first 2 movies. Number 3. Tree Gelbman, Happy Death Day to You. The entire point of Happy Death Day is that protagonist Tree is depicted as a stereotypically vapid sorority sister the first time we meet her. And though Tree doesn't do much in the way of profoundly stupid behaviour in the first movie, she's hardly a genius final girl either. Things get decidedly more complex in Happy Death Day 2U, where Tree finds herself trapped in another time loop in a different dimension. But beyond applying her experience with time loops from the first film, Tree is also required to develop a working knowledge of quantum physics while helping her pals test out a series of algorithms which will eventually break her out of the dreaded loop. By the end of the movie, Tree hasn't only escaped the loop, she's found herself working on a quantum reactor. A tantalising stinger for a third film which sadly still hasn't materialised. Number 2. Ali Ray, Paranormal Activity, The Marked Ones. Paranormal Activity 2 ends with its sole unharmed survivor being Ali Ray, who happened to be away from home on a school trip when her parents were brutally murdered by a possessed Katie. Basically, Ali survives Katie's rampage purely by luck, but when she re-emerges for a cameo appearance in spin-off Paranormal Activity The Marked Ones, she's shown to be decidedly more savvy. Ali has evidently spent the intervening few years basically becoming an occult expert, and clues the film's protagonists up on the cult they've also fallen afoul of, while quite sensibly not getting directly involved in their quest to save Jessie from being consumed by a demon. And that's the last time Ali is ever seen in the series. She's evidently kept a low profile following her parents' deaths, as has allowed her to steer clear of the cult's nefarious plans ever since. Smart girl! Number 1. Brenda Meeks, Scary Movie 2. In the first movie, Brenda Meeks is a lovable moron, hilarious and yet completely obnoxious as she talks loudly in the cinema and gets brutally attacked for her troubles. Brenda inexplicably survives the stabby assault from the assembled moviegoers and reappears in Scary Movie 2, now attending college with her best pal Cindy. While Brenda is still incredibly extra, she does display some genuine unexpected smarts when she and Cindy are attacked by a skeleton later in the film. Brenda's first intelligent move was to wait and see if the skeleton would simply kill Cindy and leave her be. But when Cindy runs over to Brenda begging for help, Brenda suddenly realizes that the skeleton is just a bunch of bones. She suddenly dismantles the skeleton by removing its head, kicking its legs out from under it, and then rearranging the order of its bones, rendering it harmless. Between this and the fact that Brenda makes it to the end of the movie basically unscathed this time around, she definitely got smarter. And that concludes our list. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.